Hello and welcome back to Watercolour Wednesday with me, Rebecca Jarman. This is episode 4 of my Back to Basics watercolour series, and today I'm going to take you through how to improve your brush techniques. There's going to be 6 different techniques to show you to build your skills and your confidence as well. So sit back, enjoy the video, and we'll get started. To begin with, I'm going to do straight lines. I've separated my paper into 6 sections and I'm going to show you the 6 different brush control techniques. So I'm going to take my round brush, this one's a number 4, and this is Permanent Rose, and this technique is going to allow you to rest your hand on the page and use that as a guide and drag the brush straight down towards you so that you can get a nice even straight line. So you just put the tip of the brush to the paper and you drag your whole arm to the bottom, and the idea is that you want to try and get a nice even line. If you have lost the point on your brush, just twist the brush in the paint and you'll get that nice fine point back, and just drag your brush straight down to the bottom. Now you can vary the thickness of your line by pressing on slightly harder each time. So this time I'm adding a little bit more pressure on the bristles of my brush, and I'm going to do the same again, same sort of pressure as before, and you'll get a slightly thicker line than we started off with. So this time I'm going to press even firmer, so you just put a little bit more pressure, drag straight down towards you, keeping your brush nice and still. I'm going to do the same pressure again, dragging it towards me, trying to create a nice straight line. I'm just going to mix up a little bit more paint. So you can do this obviously with any colour you like. I'm just using Permanent Rose here, and this time I'm going to add more pressure on the brush, and you can see it's creating a broader stroke. Now to practice this, you will find that you will have a lot more control with your brush strokes, especially if you're doing like a flat wash or something across an area. I'm going to go back to a finer line now. And yeah, if you do a nice consistent line and you're creating a flat wash, you'll get an even coverage of paint. So this is a really good technique to practice, and also a lot of the time you might be needing to produce quite a straight line. So getting to grips with this brush control and this particular brush stroke can be very helpful. So vary your thicknesses and keep going until you fill your area. You can alternate with colours if you want to. So I could dip a bit of my ultramarine blue into the pink there and get a lovely purple colour. So I'm going to do a few of those. Back to my thin line again and dragging it down. And then you can speed up the more confident you get. Use the side of your hand and your little finger, and that is what you're leaning on. That is what you're sort of getting the confidence from. You're leaning that down on the page and you're just dragging your entire arm from your shoulder down, dragging that line towards you. I'm going to stop with a fatter line. So I've applied more pressure, and the further you go, if I was to carry on this line all the way down to the bottom of my page, because I'm using a small brush of course, and the amount of paint on this isn't an awful lot, so I would start to lose colour the further I went. So if you wanted to create a very long line in your painting, then you might want to use a bigger brush that would hold more paint. So that's the straight line. If you're enjoying this video and you're gaining some insight into watercolour painting and learning some new skills, please give me a like and consider subscribing to my channel. If you press the bell icon, you'll be notified every time I upload a new watercolour tutorial. Now let's get back to the video. Now I'm going to show you how to create a tapered line. So let's mix up some a green colour. So I'm going to use some of my green gold, which is a really pretty colour. Actually, let's add a bit of the ultramarine blue as well, just to darken it up slightly. That's pretty. So this is a tapered stroke, and you might use this to create grasses, foliage, things like that. And you start at the bottom of the stroke, put some pressure on the brush, and then you drag the brush up, and as you lift the brush off the page, the end of the tips of your bristles will gradually come off and create this point. So it's almost like a little flick, and you can vary the length, so you could go a bit longer and then slowly lift off. You can vary the pressure, so I could come down here and just put a little bit of pressure on and flick up, but I'm still left with a tapered edge at the top. So if you were to do grasses, you'd always start at the base of the piece of grass, the blade of grass, press down and then release and lift. You're doing a flicky motion, and it's that motion that creates that lovely tapered effect. And just keep practicing that stroke, varying it, and do some smaller ones here, and you get a nice fat base. Things that grow always start off broader down the bottom and they taper to a point. So this is, if you did shorter versions of this, you could create a leaf. So fat at the bottom, flicking off, it's almost like a leaf shape. So you can practice that. Obviously you can do different colours. Let's darken it up a little bit. Okay. And I'm going to press down, lift up, loading my brush each time because I'm using the belly of the brush and it's taking quite a lot of paint off the brush, so I'm reloading my brush each time, and you can practice this and you get these lovely tapered shapes. You can try this with different brushes. So if you had, this is obviously still my number 4 that I'm using here, but if you have a larger brush, practice it with that. And just get used to the brushes that you have. And the more you practice like this with these strokes, the more confident you'll become at controlling the strokes, and you'll know which brush strokes to use to create the effect you want. You'll just grow in confidence that way. So yeah, just fill up a space and have a little play. This is a great time just to play with different colours and to try out your different brushes that maybe you haven't attempted to use before. So sometimes people pick up a pack of brushes and they'll automatically go to a round brush because that's the most commonly used brush and sort of know what to do with that. But have a play with different brushes. So you may well have a fan brush in your set, which is like this. So have a go with making different marks with those brushes too. But just to show you, starting from the bottom, flicking up, and that's the tapered brush stroke. Okay, so perfect for leaves, grasses, foliage, that kind of thing. So moving on, the third line that I want to show you is a curvy line or a pulsating line. So it's similar to the straight line. I'll just let's mix up some of the crimson. That's a pretty colour. So I have some crimson on my brush there. And this time you want to start off with, I'm bringing the point together, the tip's just lost a little bit there. So press with your tip, drag down, and then as you come down you press with the belly of your brush, then you lift up and you press down again and you lift up and you press down and you lift up, and you create these kind of pulsating curvy lines. So this is a sort of a mix between the first two that we practiced at the top. So you can alternate this, you can do nice long thin sections before pressing down flat and coming back up. Lift off that pressure to create the thin line. And I'm going to start off quite fat now, lift up, so alternating between those, and you can create lovely patterns. Again, let's add some ultramarine blue and get a nice purple going. And you could do it quicker, you can start fat, thin, fat, thin, fat, so you can make more of the curvy areas. Let's go into some more blue. So you could probably create a nice pretty painting actually using these different techniques. So let's do another thin, fat variation. And just keep going in that way until you fill up the section. So I might try a thinner one this time. So thin, dragging it down, slowly putting on pressure, really bringing it up again, thin line, and then pulling down. And what this is doing is it's helping you control the pressure on the brush. So you're very mindfully pushing down, you're knowing when you want to come up again, you know the sort of pattern you want to create, and you're being really mindful with the amount of pressure and the amount of movement of the brush. Going to go back to some more crimson. The more water you have on your brush, the easier the paint will run off it. So if your brush begins to get quite dry, the paint doesn't want to run off it as easily. So if you find that happening, just add some more water to the mix. One final one, flat down, then lift up, press down and lift up, press down and lift up. Okay, so this kind of technique is also good for petals. So you can see these lovely bulbous shapes to the point. You can create nice petals with that as well. Again, looking at the previous one, you know, leaves and foliage. But this whole idea of creating a mark very consistently and very mindfully getting control over the pressure is going to really help you build your confidence. So that's technique number 3. So number 4 is we're going to look at holding the brush on the side. So I'm going to switch up brushes now actually and go for a larger brush. This is a number 8. Again, it's round. Let's go for a pale blue. So the cerulean blue here I'm mixing up, which is a really lovely colour, great for skies and things. Really fresh colour. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I've been using the brush on its point, sort of standing upright, which is how you would hold a pen. This time I'm going to use my brush holding it on the side, and I'm going to use the belly of the brush to drag a line from top to bottom. And because I'm using my larger brush, I can create a really broad stroke. Let's go for a bit more paint this time and strengthen that colour. So on its side and drag down. And I'm getting a bit of a dry brush effect there because it's such a large brush that it will hold a lot more paint, but it also puts down a lot more paint quicker. And I've got a bit of a dry brush effect there, so let's make sure there's enough water in my brush. Bigger brushes are very thirsty brushes, if you think of it that way. And pressing down on the side and dragging that down. So you can sort of understand from this kind of stroke that you can fill an area very, very quickly using the brush on its side, and it might be something you want to do for a sky or something like that. If I go back to switch quickly to my smaller round brush and pick up some of that blue paint and do a stroke at the end here with this one on the side of itself, it might not last all the way to the bottom. No, it's running out of paint very quickly. You can see there it's drying up very quickly, but you can see the difference that has made. It's a much thinner mark as opposed to this one here, which is nice and broad. So that's a really good one if you need to fill a large area quite quickly with a consistent coverage of paint. So that was using the brush on its side. And number 5, I'm going to just clean that big brush off, bring my palette back, and I'm going to use the 2 brushes this time, and we're going to stamp with the brush. So I'm going to, let's see, what can we do? Let's use a darker green now. So I'm going to go into my sap green, pick up some of that. Make sure I've got plenty of it. And I'm going to use my round number 4 to create some stamped marks. So you just place it down on its side and you can create these very repetitive marks. If you vary the gaps between them, then it'll be a sort of a lighter overall effect because you've got the white of the paper coming through. You can twist the brush and create vertical marks as well. You can build up texture using this technique quite easily, just stamping down. Now if I switch back to my larger brush, pick up some of that green. Okay. And do the same thing. It's a much bigger stamp and a larger coverage, as you could have guessed. But you can bring the 2 together. We could actually lighten the colour up. Let's go into cadmium yellow, bring in some cadmium yellow, and it will show you how you can build up texture by just switching the colour slightly. So bringing in some yellow marks over the top of some of the marks I've already made. And this might work nicely for stonework or bushes, trees, you know, you can bring two colours together nicely, and you can create this what looked like uniform marks to begin with, but because we've layered it up, you begin to get a much more naturalistic effect. So the leaves on trees, you can build up this layered effect. Or if we're using different colours, of course, it could be good for stonework or something like that, maybe a pavement, or even a sandy beach. You have a lovely texture there. You could do an underwash, which is pale, so that you don't have white marks coming through. You'd actually have a colour showing underneath it. Let's bring in some blue now. I'm just going to continue just creating these marks on the page. So this would be nice to create an effect across water. You know, you've got that light in between the marks, so sort of a glistening on the water, that kind of thing. Bring in a few of these blue over the top. So just playing about with what these brushes can do. Now, if I had time in this video, I could show you what marks a flat brush would make, a fan brush. We could use a really broad flat brush and see what we can do with that. But I just encourage you to go away and try all of your brushes and see what different marks you can create with those, and just get used to using them in different ways and build your confidence up that way. So that's the stamping method. And finally, I'm going to show you dry brushing. Now, this is a really great technique for watercolours, and let's see, let's use this. I've got some quinacridone gold, which is a really lovely colour. Let's use some of that, a nice sunshine kind of colour. Now, the trick here is although I've got some paint there on the palette, I want to make sure that my brush, the belly of the brush, is quite dry. I don't want a lot of water in my brush, so I'm going to pick up some paint and I'm going to use the brush on its side again and drag the brush across the surface and create some dry brushing. So you can see what happens is, because the brush is fairly dry, the paint is just being picked up by the tooth of the paper. So where I have peaks, you can see the paint, and where there are troughs in the texture of the paper, the paint is so dry that it won't seep into those troughs and it leaves the white of the paper. So let's keep going with this. So you can do this with your, if I do it slightly darker like this, you can see the effect a little bit more. So I've just got more pigment on my brush there, straight from the palette, and you can see that you can create these beautiful marks, distressed marks that you could never emulate when actually painting. You know, if I tried to carefully paint around some of these marks, it's never going to happen. It's going to take me all day long. I'm going to get frustrated. But if you did do this technique, you can create some beautiful texture, and really rather quickly there I filled that space. And actually this would be beautiful for across a water scene, you know, if you've got the sunlight hitting the water. These are the kind of effects that you would see, the glistening coming through. So I'm hoping that you've learned a lot from this. Try out each of these techniques for yourself using your range of brushes, and just become more confident in what you can do with each of those. Gain the control of pressure. That's key really when watercolour painting. If you know the pressure you need to use with your brush for a particular stroke, and you're confident that you know the mark that you're going to create before you've created it, then this is all brilliant for, you know, building your confidence and being successful in your paintings. Thank you for joining me this week. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Next week is episode 5 of my Back to Basics watercolour series, and we're going to be looking at 4 interesting and unique ways of creating texture in your watercolour painting. So I hope you'll join me again then. Take care. See you soon.